Welcome, everyone. I'm Ashish, Kaushal, CEO of diversity staffing firm HireTalent and founder of Consciously Unbiased, a movement to build belonging in the workplace. Our topic today is belonging starts at the top. We will cover some of the challenges facing meeting diversity and inclusion goals within corporations, how the C-suite execs can take ownership of building belonging, and how to create safe spaces for discussions about DEI in the workforce. But first, let's introduce our guests. Today we have Dyer. He's non-employee retention and acquisition expert and a good friend of mine. And I'm actually just really proud to see him finding his voice and living his mission. So welcome, John. We have William Wiggins, Director of HR at SEIU Benefits Group. He's having a little technical issue, so he should be back soon. Then we have Tameiko Davis, Principal Engineering Recruiting at Amazon. And Susan Walsh, Diversity, Belonging, and Inclusion Activist. Welcome, everybody, at T-Mobile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we lost John for a second, too. So, then there were three. And here
I have no idea what happened.
So, Susan, let's start with you. Can you tell us who you are, what you do, and why today's topic of diversity starts at the top personally is important to you?
Thank you very much, and thanks for hosting and moderating these wonderful conversations. As you said, my name is Susan Long-Walsh, and I have been a part of the D&I world since I was born. For those of you who are not sight impaired, you can see that I am a woman and I am Black. I've never been one without the other. And this work is critical because we all have to work. Even Oprah works. And so when we go into the workplace, you do not meet people starting from zero. So how do we take what babies have seen as far as color from them 3 months of age up into the day that they enter into the workplace with everything that is inside this brain, and it's filled with biases. We all have them. So how do our leaders, starting at the top, because I consider everyone to be a leader, including individual contributors, how do we create a workplace that's not only inclusive of other people, but where they actually feel they belong? When you feel you belong, you have retention. You can invite me to the baseball game, but I can sit in the dugout. And you talk about going out for beers and never invite me. You've included me to be on your team, but I never get to play. Or I'm the one that's always playing, and then you take credit for all my home runs. And so that's the work that I do, working with leaders to try and help them understand their beliefs, their behaviors, and how those habits of harm affect a culture.
I love it. Thank you. Welcome. We're excited to have you back again.
Thanks.
Tameiko, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Tameiko. I'm the only one up here with just one name. Yes, I do have a last name. It's Davis. I work over there at Amazon with everybody else. And I'm on the principal engineering recruiting team. So much like Susan, been born Black, female, and I've been both a long time. Diversity has always been important to me. And now that we're having these conversations and you can see how, to some extent, awkward and how the progress has been maybe even 5 steps forward, but then 3 steps back. And so it feels like we've still made some progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. I mean, just before we hopped on this call, we were talking about right terms to use, right? So that these are inclusive terms as opposed to things that come out of the gate negative sounding. So I think the more of these conversations, this work is done one-on-one, one to many, many to one. It can't stop until the work is done and folks are in a place where we can welcome people and belong. And the last thing I would say is that the tone is set at the top. And so if you work for a place where the tone is toxic, then you've got to think about, potentially like if you have a role like Susan's, your job is to help shift that culture as far as belonging and inclusivity. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
I love it. Welcome. And so you're saying it's much easier to change a culture and make it inclusive if you're pushing a boulder down a mountain rather than trying to push it up the mountain.
Absolutely.
William, welcome.
Thank you.
So can you share with everybody who you are, what you do, and today's topic of diversity starts at the top, why it's personally important to you?
Okay, I sure can. Good morning, everyone. My name is William Wiggins. My preferred pronouns are he, his, and him, and I identify as Black. I think that I have been aware that there is a diversity issue, like Susan, since I was born, but particularly when I was a teenager and I got the talk from my father to be careful out there in the world. I think I agree with Tameiko and Susan. It absolutely starts at the top, one leader at a time. I know the landmines and the pitfalls of trying to push a diversity initiative on my own as an HR leader, thinking since this is in my wheelhouse, I'm solely responsible for this, and it has never worked. And so I absolutely believe it starts one leader at a time. And I so agree with Susan that we are all leaders in an organization. It's not necessarily the people who sign the paychecks or the people in a formal leadership position. I do believe that initiatives are pushed from the top down, though, in an organization. And if people make diversity a part of their standard work, and that comes down from the top, we would have a much better chance of pushing this initiative and advancing diversity at respective organizations. It's very important to me because I've spent all of my career in corporate America, and I could probably write a book on how it has impacted me being a Black man, what I've had to do even to get to where I am today. I am the Director of Human Resources at an organization called SEIU Benefits, SEIU 775 Benefits, and I am lucky enough to have a leadership team that believes in diversity and gives me the leeway to be able to push the diversity initiative where we are.
I love it. Start from the top. John, you're next.
So good morning, everyone. I couldn't be happier to see all of these dear friends of mine that I've known. I've known Susan since 1992. She hired me at Microsoft. I've known Tameiko and William since the early 2000s. Let me tell you, there's a lot of really incredible, diverse talent that's looking for more people like them here to be brought into Seattle. Diversity is important to me because as a young kid, I experienced bias, but the weird kind of bias that maybe nobody else on this call has, which is I was about 6'4", 220 pounds by the time I was 12. Everybody wanted me to be a football player when I really wanted to date one. You couldn't do that kind of stuff in the 1970s. So I'm super passionate about diversity for that reason. And I think one of the things that I'll talk about later in the call today is how employee resource groups can be the lifeblood of inclusion at companies if they're done right. There's no silver bullet, but for me, it was super helpful in coming out years ago. So really grateful to you, Ash, to keep pushing the needle on this, especially in the contingent talent industry where we don't have the same push, I think, on DE&I like we do on the full-time hiring, but we're going to change that.
Absolutely, and it takes a village to make that happen. So we love that you guys are all part of the journey. So can you share an anecdote about a time when a leader or a manager had a big impact on you and made you feel like you're truly seen and belonged? Who'd like to start?
I'll go ahead and go first. I had a leader here in Seattle when I first came into the employee benefits community, who believed in, she was one of the first people who I worked for that had a staff that represented every race nearly, and even handicapped. And she was someone who really pushed diversity before it was a buzzword. And I received from her a lot of the way I manage and the way I interface with people in the workplace. I actually adopted from her in terms of giving everyone a fair chance and creating that equal opportunity work environment. It was a very conservative industry that I was in. Not many Black men in Seattle were in employee benefits and insurance. And we used to laugh because we could go to a conference and you could count the 3 Black men in an audience that were in this business. And so I always say that my leader, Barb was her name, took a chance. When no one else would, or few people would. And so that's where I adopted my sort of leadership style and my approach to diversity. Another time when I was impacted by leaders, I was working with an organization who decided that they wanted to do diversity. So the CFO offered me an opportunity to take this diversity job. So I proposed what I thought that meant, how to bring people into an organization, training programs. And so as I'm in this presentation with the CFO, he stopped me and he said, I had sort of in mind something more like you would be in charge of, I kid you not, you would be in charge of like potlucks and bring your culture to work day. And that was really impactful for me because that was actually the first time I thought, okay, so this is what people associate diversity with, is everybody bring a meal from their own country and we all get together and sing kumbaya, and that's kind of it. And so that changed the way that also changed the way that I approach diversity in the workplace, because I saw it from a lens of someone who was in power, and I could see where that attitude permeated the organization.
Love it. Susan, would you like to go next?
Oh, definitely. Thank you. You know, an impact from a leader that I have had the incredible pleasure of working with is, I'll start by saying that, you know, people have titles, but so do movies and books, and so does artwork, and people get them, and it doesn't necessarily mean that because they have that title that they actually do lead. And I think the first part of being a leader is that you have to have a lot of courage, you have to speak truth to power, and you have to have a lot of integrity. And when you start to work for someone like that, who is going to exhibit those types of behaviors, because their beliefs are that it does not matter who you look like, where you live, who you love, your pedigree and your zip code. They understand that having those unique differences at the table will only enhance you as an individual, but as a team, as your product, and as your organization. And once you start working for someone like that, which sadly I have found it's very rare, it really is impactful, particularly if you are someone that is typically the only in the room. Because more than once I've heard people say, hiring managers say, we have to lower the bar or check a box because now we have to go and hire a woman or hire a person with disabilities or hire somebody who's Black. And particularly now, post George Floyd, you're hearing a lot of what are we going to do about reverse discrimination against white people. So we are just in really interesting times right now, to where it is critical for us to really all stop, take a breath, and really just start to listen.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody has a story, and so I'm not going to write yours, but I want the respect and the dignity of you not to write mine.
Yeah. You know, you brought up a point that I've been talking to clients about as well, is that they always say they can't find qualified, diverse talent, right?
We don't hide from these jobs.
Yeah. And I say, go back and look at the second choice person that you didn't hire because they weren't like you. And I guarantee you that you'll find tons of talent that just wasn't selected. And then whenever they go back, they find that that's true.
I've always said, out of all the years that I've recruited, bias training should start with recruiters and organizations, because they can be the biggest barrier to having people who don't look, live, and love like them be advanced, because their networks are so narrow and they don't understand the biases that they bring into what they do in their roles, myself included. There were so many things that I had to learn and that I still continue to learn.
No, definitely. Tameiko, I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this one, and I didn't want to call just anyone out. I'll keep it broad. That when you have someone who sees you, they get to know you as a person, they know enough about you so that when something comes up and they can see when you need support, right? They can see when you need help. They're having enough conversations with you that they've gotten a chance to see you, right? So as one of the things we're getting into later is about, specifically Black women, right? I don't want to be seen as someone who's the angry Black woman. And frankly, if I am, then isn't it sort of your manager's responsibility to work with you, right, in terms of your branding and your image. And so, there's nothing like it when you have someone who sees you for the good and sees you for the things that they know you can do. That is an amazing feeling. You'll get people to continue to show up. You'll have less sick days because you won't have, again, a work environment that makes people sick. And you'll also have retention. So all of these things actually work in your favor.
Absolutely. And the angry Black woman comment, I think if somebody says that, they should really think about what did they do to cause that situation.
There you go. It's funny because it's always outward looking, right? And it's like, I didn't get here on my own, right? Like if I am angry, it's like there's a reason why, and you might want to come check it out. Like this is what good colleagues and coworkers do, right? They inquire and look to help. Like, we're on a team. We all have similar goals, right? In terms of how we partner with the organization to get work done. If we're in recruiting, then we're partners with the organization to hire people. Like, my job is not to be here and not hire. If I'm in a management role, my job is to make sure I'm getting the best out of my people. Like, none of these things change, right? And so why different people are having vastly different experiences in the workplace is really disappointing, because you actually, to some extent, have to kind of go out of your way to provide a negative experience over here and a positive experience over there. There's effort that's put to that. So there's nothing like it when you find someone who is supportive of you. And I've had a few in my, more than a few, frankly, in my lifetime, but I've also had the opposite. And that's not been, obviously that's not as fun.
No, absolutely. And John, your thoughts?
So this recalls the time years ago at Microsoft when I was moving out of one group into another, and my current manager at the time had to give a reference, and she said something that I've never forgotten. She said, when I first met John, talk about over the top, talk about somebody that was loud, talk about somebody that lives his life out loud. But she said, straight men, that's considered boisterous and fun-loving and a leader. But he was over the top. She goes, I went from I didn't know what I was going to do with him to I didn't know what I was going to do without him. And I love that, because she truly allowed me to kind of just live my life, but live it out loud and not just be tolerated. Living your truth for some people is really hard to swallow. But in the workplace, I found that if you really embrace and learn to understand different people, the benefit is so incredible. So that I'll never forget that. I didn't know what to do with him at first, but now I don't know what to do without him. So
I love that. We always talk about positivity and consciously unbiased. I think it's easy to say what people aren't doing, but it's harder to show what people are doing really well. And the thing is, I always say, you got to see it to be it. And so which leaders and companies do you guys think are doing a good job of building D&I from the top down? Because I think that's a great way to have other companies look at model behavior.
I think Salesforce their CEO is doing a good job. He's been amplifying his voice pre-George Floyd. So it wasn't something where, everybody else is doing it. So we have to, all of a sudden just put a black banner in our window and, power to the people. And so there is, and again, that is a part of being a courageous leader and amplifying your voice. But it's more than just having your advertising agency and your communications divisions write you all this great rhetoric. Anybody can do that. And we all have heard rhetoric for years. Where's the action? And so the organizations where the CEO is saying, this is what we're going to do. It's a new sheriff in town. It's a different rodeo. And here's the actions and here's the expectations. And not only internally, but what's happening with their recruiting, because they're realizing that's a huge part of retention. Who are your suppliers? How diverse are they? And do their actions and what they do under their umbrellas align with yours? And that's key. The SurveyMonkey CEO has now, there are questionnaires for all of their suppliers. And if you are not aligning with the culture that SurveyMonkey is working to become, because this is not going to happen overnight, they won't use you as a provider. So no, money talks.
Yeah.
But the actions behind it have to be more than your decimals moving to the left. And as you continue for your wealth to accumulate and act like I've got mine, who cares?
So I think the lesson is that your vendors have to sort of support your mission and live your truth as well.
Absolutely. Internally, externally.
Yeah, definitely. William, your thoughts?
I agree with Susan. I'm going to say that I think there's so much work to be done in this arena. I'm not prepared to say any one particular organization is doing it good or doing it well. At this point, I am going to talk about my own organization for just a bit. And again, I think those organizations that are doing it well have someone at the top that's pushing the initiatives, that's following up, that gives the leadership team the freedom to and the permission to think outside the box, to recruit outside the box, to set up programs, internship programs, to partner with organizations and agencies externally where they can source diverse candidates from versus just UW or some of the higher ranking schools that not everyone can afford to go to, but nonetheless people might be as educated as people who come from outside those organizations. And so I don't want to say anybody is doing it very well or good because we haven't been doing it long enough. But I'd say an organization that would be doing it well is, again, someone who is committed, who has that CEO at the top who's committed to it and is pushing it from the top down and has, again, made it a part of the standard work.
So you're saying turn intent into action and be persistent about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Tameiko, I think I have friends that work at Amazon and they tell me the amazing things that they're doing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on who you think is doing it well and where you're doing it well.
Yeah, it's funny because when I read this question, I'm like, it's like the cloud with the question mark in the air staring. And I agree with William. I think we have yet to see it. I think we have ways to go. And the larger your company is, the likelihood it will take longer, especially if your company is large and has been around for a long time because you've built up a certain culture. And now it might be like the Titanic trying to turn. Yeah. And so I really did think very hard about this and hope to come out with a different answer. But I just, until I think we've had 2 Black female Fortune 500 CEOs. Ursula Burns was one. I think there's 2 now. Plus we had Ursula Burns, right? Black people have been here forever, right? And so to some extent, getting boxed out of opportunities, right? Because all these people, when you get to the senior levels, you get groomed.
Yeah. And
if you're not getting the grooming, then it's going to other people. And oftentimes those people are no more qualified than you, right? Mm-hmm. They're not. They've been given the opportunity. And so I would love to see, where you can sort of open the numbers on a company and see it's half, people who identify as female, half people who identify as male. In percent in leadership roles are white, Asian, Black, Latinx, and that these numbers are kind of similar, right? As opposed to 60% white male, and then you're trickling down sort of to everybody else. So I think I'm happy we're having these conversations. I think we have a lot of work to do, and it sounds like a number of companies are wanting to put in the work. I think Amazon is, while I'm not a spokesperson for the company, it does feel like we're wanting to make these changes. So I say, let's go, saddle up.
Absolutely. And I think T-Mobile is doing some amazing things as well. John, your thoughts?
So, that question, I really had a hard time answering who's doing it well, because I don't think anybody's really doing it well across the spectrum. I can only really answer that from my perspective of the companies that I've worked for. So I think Microsoft, in the days I was there in the 90s, was good for gay people, was good for neurodiverse people. They weren't so great for Black people. They weren't so great for Asian people. When I went to Amazon, Amazon was all about getting big fast when I was there. And I think the customer centricity was more important in those days. But I think they're really improving and they're really coming a long way. AT&T, I think also, given its merger mania that took place in the early 2000s, there are a lot more diverse people being put together underneath that umbrella. But I will say, in terms of employee resource groups, they're probably one of the better in the country. I mean, their Black ERG program is probably 12,000 members. So I mean, they're trying to do be a lot better about that. But I'm glad Susan brought up the example of, I think it's Mark Benoff is his name. That's the CEO. Yep. I mean, that's a good example, Susan. I appreciate you were at least positive enough to think of that. But I just can't think of anybody that's doing it across the board very well yet.
And I would say, I would push, does it show up in their numbers, right? Does it show up in your employee base? And I don't remember seeing a tech company yet that I've been super thrilled by their diversity numbers. And I think Salesforce sits in that same camp. I really do wish I could be more positive. I think we just have more work to do. That's all. And I think Mark Benioff is an incredible leader. And I think he is someone who can help get it done.
Yeah. No, but I do think look, there's absolutely a lot of work to do, but I do think the companies that put it in their DNA and live it, over time it'll happen, because you're not going to change that momentum. I can tell you Best Buy is doing some amazing things as well. So it's another company that people should check out because they're weaving it through every layer of their organization. And so I think that's the key, is that it's woven through everything, and not just an initiative. I also always say you got to treat your diversity goals like a business unit. And if your business unit is not growing fast enough, the manager's going to get fired for that. And so if your diversity goals aren't getting there as a business unit, then you need to do some fixing around that.
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely.
Diversity is not a standalone. It's not an island. It's not something that you just, occasionally, throw a hook out to say, can you come in and be our poster child? Yep. This has to be a part of your strategy and your overall business strategies from the top.
Absolutely. And so
everything that you do.
Speaking of that, what are the biggest challenges you think companies face in making their D&I goals a reality?
Not having them.
That's a great one.
I think, Ashish, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier. I have heard so many times, first of all, diversity is not just a feel good. We're all getting along. We have, Black or brown representation, LGBT. It's not just a feel good sort of initiative. It has to, I totally agree with you. It has to show up in the business results and be a part of the overall strategy. I have heard so many times, same thing. We have to lower the bar. I've heard, I can't hire who I want to hire. I have to hire a woman, or, I have to hire, a person of color. And I always call these comments out. And I actually believe in, I tell my recruiters to, if you are working with a hiring manager, it is your job to sort of be that consultant. Take this diversity initiative on and be that consultant to push for this, because at the end of the day, it only enhances the organization. If you have a department that has no diversity in it, it's up to you to push that and bring that to the table. And source diversity candidates. And it's not true that there are no qualified diversity candidates out there on the streets. Like Susan said, we're not hiding from these jobs, but I think it starts from the top down, of course, but then we have to influence our people, our hiring managers, our recruiters. We have to engage them in the work, because that is where it starts, coming into the door. And I think you have to have metrics around it, and you have to hold people accountable to those metrics. When I was in sales, we were held to sales goals. I think diversity should be a goal that people are held to as well as a leader. If you don't meet those goals, why not? What can we do to support you? Because this is important to the organization.
Absolutely. If you don't measure, it doesn't get fixed. 100%. I always say, one of the challenges is when we do training, we talk about, people always say, well, I can't find it because it's not the right cultural fit. And I think cultural fit is synonymous with saying, are they like me? Are they part of our group? And I think if you start, one of the suggestions we give companies is, if you take your mission and your values and you create questions around the missions and the values, you'll get your cultural fit, but you'll turn it from subjective to objective when you're hiring.
Mm-hmm.
So it's clear that, but does anyone else have anything to add on that? No.
Nope.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John. I'll go.
No. Go ahead. I'm fine.
I was just going to say, when I think about some of these tech companies that I've worked for, they've been so successful, like changed our lives. If I think about Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and none of these companies are very diverse, and certainly not as you get to the senior leadership levels. And so, I think to some extent the market, not me, but the market, the atmosphere can say, well, look, we've been successful not being diverse. And so why now? Why do we need to lower the bar to hire you people, right? And so I think we have to have two things. I think we have to have a better reply, for one, because there are people who still do think that way, and there probably will always be people who think that way. But I think, two, it does seem like after last year's events, of people, Black people's encounters with police, Black people's encounters with general people on the street and being hunted down. Like, there's a reality that this is stuff that Black folks have been knowing, certainly here in the US, for centuries, right? That's been passed along because it's a part of our culture and who we are, irrespective of whether we live in the inner city or not. Everybody else seemed to kind of come awake last year. And so it's like, we've been telling you this for a very long time. And so here we are, right? So and so I think it feels like now companies are starting to say, yeah, you're right, we should probably diversify our organizations, because for the most part, a lot of your customers are the world, right? Amazon's customers are the world. Google's customers are the world. Microsoft's customers are the world. And so if your employee base reflects the world, then you will have less groupthink, more creative and diverse ideas. And you won't have things like a photo app that identifies a Black person as a gorilla, right? When if you had had just a couple of Black people on that squad, I bet you they would have identified that. Are we also accounting for people who are varying shades of color, all the way from very, very light to very, very dark? Because that is the human spectrum. And so, long answer to your short question, but I think part of it is tech companies have been successful by not being diverse, and now there's a bit of a racial reckoning that people are becoming awake to, and so let's do something about it. So it starts here, it starts now.
Absolutely. John, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, she makes a great point about, does your employee base and your supplier base reflect your customer base? That's such a simple rule, but it's really a hard thing for some companies to embrace. They just don't understand that concept. And I think it's just a rule of thumb that I've lived by. When I used to manage the diversity supplier program for AT&T, I got in a lot of trouble because guess what? I wouldn't allow a new supplier into the program unless they were diverse. Oh my God, did I get in trouble from people about that? But that was the mandate we took. This was back in the early 2000s, and I wouldn't back down from it. And it was one of those things where I got in some trouble. I think after I left, they changed that. But I was like, no, I'm not going to allow you in unless you're a diverse supplier. And so sometimes you have to be super intentional about these things, because sweet words, let's walk the talk here.
I agree. Absolutely. It's clear that diversity and inclusion it's not only the right thing to do, but it's good for the bottom line. And it goes back to what Tameiko was saying. What benefits do you think are most important to highlight the buy-in from the top in leadership? Is it diversity dividend, diversity's effect on turnover, attracting better talent? People want to work in a diverse space, especially given the events of last year and even this year. So what do you think is a big catalyst to the business case?
I think the catalyst is always, how are you going to bring in the best talent and retain them in your organization in order for your product or whatever it is that your organization is a part of producing? How are you going to find and maintain that talent to come in? And that talent, I know we were talking before we came on camera about boomers and the different, millennials, but Gen Z is the most diverse generation in our country's history. Deloitte has done detailed research and has data that Gen Zers leave on an average 3 jobs to get to the one that's going to align with their values. And their values are diversity top to bottom, especially top. They don't care who you love, what color your hair is. They're not going to check your box. And from the recruiters saying, we want to see your pedigree, Gen Z is like, we want to see yours. We want to know what you're doing. So if you can't bring that talent into your organization, you're not going to continue to be in the top fortune because you won't have the talent to do what it is you need. And they also will not buy your product. And so folks are going to have to start paying attention to the younger workforce because they're going to be the ones that are really going to start to shift and change. And yes, you still are going to have your part of your workforce, which are Proud Boys, et cetera, that do not care about the values of diversity unless it's them. But that's the reality of the world that we live in.
No, absolutely. Well said. I think I agree with you. I think definitely half the companies that don't embrace this will probably not be around, much less be Fortune 1000 in 5 or 6 years, because it's happening rapidly, and it just proves that no one has a monopoly on intelligence, consumers, or anything else, right? It's all spread out, and we have to make sure we tap into that talent.
Right. It's more about EQ these days than IQ.
Yeah. William, what are your thoughts?
I think that Susan is absolutely right. We're going to have to, Tameiko just said that organizations are saying, I've been very successful without diversity. Why should I have diversity now? And I think you all hit the nail on the head. The world is changing. People aren't asking the same type of questions when they come forth as candidates to a job interview. They want to know what is the organization's culture. They want to know what is the organization's commitment to social justice movements, and those are very different questions from when we were coming up. And so I think that absolutely the generation that's coming into the workforce now is very, very different. They are more concerned about those things sometimes than they are about money. And so I think by hook or by crook, organizations are going to have to address this and figure out what their commitment is to diversity or social justice issues, because the market is going to call for it. Also, with so many different rating tools and social media outlets for people to describe their experience in an organization, a lot of people come to the organization with questions around things that they've read on Glassdoor, for example. And so at some point, these organizations are going to have to realize that the workforce and the talent that's out there on the streets that we're clamoring for, these are important issues to them. And so how can we say how successful we could possibly be when we've only tested it one way? Who's to say that if we bring in more diversity, and I'm even talking about a diversity of ideas, a diversity of thought, who's to say that we couldn't move the needle even farther in terms of our success? And so I think that organizations are going to have to address it because this is not going away.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought in the idea of diversity of thought, because I think that's one of the value propositions. It's where we innovate. So John, this is one close to your heart, ERGs. How are they playing a role in shifting the culture within an organization?
Well, it's interesting. So I look at what Twitter is doing and what LinkedIn is doing. They're actually paying their ERG leaders now an extra bonus besides their salary, because this is no longer just a side hustle or a gig. It's like, ERGs are important. And what I find really interesting is how recruiting is now. I'm seeing some companies in their job descriptions actually drop in names of their ERG groups, because they want to start right off the bat with, come join us and learn, or before you join us, come learn more about us through our ERG groups. Inclusion does not have the popularity that diversity hiring has. There's been a lot of movement towards diversity hiring, but once you bring them into the fold, they don't feel like they belong. feel like they're still invisible. They're not really in leadership roles. And so I think ERGs, if done well, they're not a silver bullet, but I think if done well, they can really change somebody's life. They did mine. I mean, I had never been open or out in a company in my life until I joined an ERG group in the mid 90s. And ERGs have interesting roots. The first ERG started at Xerox. And you know why? The white CEO was getting so many complaints from his black employees there that he decided to start the first ERG group. I think it was called the Black Network. I mean, this was back in 1970. So, inclusion is one of those things that has to matter. 2043, according to the United States Census, white people will be the minority in this country. I mean, if you can't look at this as a moral imperative for equality, you have to look at it as a business imperative. You have to be more inclusive in your culture. You're not gonna be able to retain talent. That's if you can't look at this from a moral perspective, look at it from a business perspective, I guess.
100%. Well said. And speaking of that, Tameiko, the tech companies, or even beyond the tech companies, what do you have to do to focus on hiring and also focus on retention? And what do you think the steps are to retaining that talent? Because I think it's one thing to bring somebody in the door, but getting them to want to stay is as important. It's expensive for companies to bring onboard talent and not retain them. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. So I wanted to also comment very quickly on John's ERG, if you don't mind. That was incredible, because I've worked at companies where they exist, and I think that they do serve a useful purpose. But I think it almost feels like things are going to the next level with some of these places that you just mentioned. And so, I mean, to have the Xerox CEO say, okay, something's amiss, then, let's get this started. And it's funny because if that story was more well known, and this was the 70s, think about how far we could be. The other thing that I'll say is that the work that's being done, and Susan, I know you can probably speak to this, you come up against these barriers, I'll call it. Like, people like the status quo, they like the way that things have been, because when you're working with senior leaders oftentimes are not necessarily diverse, right? And not diverse gender-wise, and not diverse ethnic-wise, certainly as far as being Black or brown. And so there you are trying to push an agenda when the first thing we kind of have to do is get to the root of where people are, right? Get to the root in terms of their personal beliefs. Do they really know history and some of the things that have gone on? When you think about Black people, you come over on a slave ship, you have offspring, they're in slavery, you fast forward, this goes on for a while, then you've got Jim Crow, you're not able to vote, you're 3/5 of a person, and then then Obama comes on the scene, and here you are, and it's like nobody is necessarily healed from all of this. And so I didn't tell myself I was 3/5 of a person. Somebody told me, and so obviously I wasn't around then, but I shouldn't say obviously, but I wasn't around then. But what we're not doing is we're not necessarily addressing this sort of head on. Why do we believe women are not as capable? Why do we believe Blacks couldn't be quarterbacks or coaches in the NFL? The NFL is 69% Black. It might even be higher now. And so it doesn't make sense. Because you don't think we're smart enough. Oftentimes this is the root. The root is, it's binary. And I'm smart and you can't be smart too. I'm superior, and if I'm superior, I have to be superior to someone. It's going to be to you. So I think to some extent, we've got to start addressing things from a different standpoint, not from let's go recruit these people to this toxic environment. Let's actually figure out, clean up our house first. Okay, I don't care how many people are here that are not diverse. You can start right here, right now. I feel like I'm on a soapbox, but hear me out. Right here, right now, and change your culture. Be more inclusive. Get it to a place where you're now, like Susan said earlier, you're invited to the event and then invited to participate, and that people welcome you to participate. We have to address things at the root. Look at the soccer players, the 3 soccer players in England that missed the PKs. They were heroes up until that moment. And right after that, now you're zeros. Now here come the racist comments. And those same people who were making racist comments, I'm sure if they had made all of their shots, I'm sure they would be the same people who'd want to go have beers with these people. And so we are absolutely not addressing this at the root. And the problem is you can't until somebody lets you know it's okay. You can't until you sort of check your own fragility. Why critical race theory is now an issue about white people hearing they're bad. This is not right. Like we've got to sort of address things head on. You don't think I'm as good as you, which means I have to go off and get more education. I have to go off and do these things. I have to have twice the results that you have, yet you and I are in the same place. Like, and you're like, yeah, you should be happy that you're where I am. What are you talking about, right? We absolutely have to get this. Otherwise, we will continue to have these same conversations over and over and over. We've been doing it for easily 40 plus years. We have moved about this much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And then just the comment that you made about the NFL, you know, with the payouts that they're doing from the head injuries. I don't know if you're aware that they have deemed that because the black players aren't as smart, they won't get as large a percentage from head injuries as the white players. So
Wow.
This is really about what is instilled in the beliefs which drive the behaviors because of lack of knowledge or lack of caring or all of the above.
Right.
And so you're right, Tameiko. This is something to where the courageous conversations have to really begin and continue. And your being uncomfortable is a part of you listening, learning, and then acting.
Do you think part of this is the fear that somebody is talented as me or more talented than me, and I'm afraid to lose that power, so I don't want to even look that direction?
You know what? This is a big ass pie. Excuse my French. And if you want a tart or if you want your gluten-free cookie, there is enough to go around. No one's taking from anyone else. And so this fear of that you're going to lose your power and your control is because you've deemed you're the only ones that are supposed to have it.
Right.
And that comfort of having everyone around you look the same, live in the same communities, go to school with your children if you have them, the people you have over at dinner, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you bring in that one female and or male, or the person who is black or brown, or whatever you deem to be that underrepresented talent from diverse backgrounds, because there is no such thing as diverse people, then you think you've done your job. Mm-hmm. Well, do you just have one customer that looks that way? Because I think you'd be out of business.
Totally.
And if I can add something to that, I want to encourage employers out there, whoever is listening, to have these types of conversations. It's not politically incorrect. Race is not politically incorrect. And it's very, very difficult to understand where someone is coming from when we have a long list of things around diversity that are considered taboo within an organization. I've had someone a few weeks ago to tell, I referred to myself as Black, and she corrected me. She was a white female, corrected me and said, well, African American. I like, the sound, Black, I don't like the sound of that. That just sounds really, and I had to kind of get her straight. Not everyone that you see Black is African American. And so, and we had this long discussion about it, and it was uncomfortable, but we came to, I think she learned a lot out of the discussion that we had. But there's so many things that we consider taboo in the workplace, and no, don't talk about race, don't say Black, African American, is it colored, whatever, we need to be able to have these types of discussions, and we need to be either comfortable or uncomfortable with these types of discussion to progress this initiative. Who says that race is politically incorrect? We talk about everything else. And so I think until we give ourselves permission, and we have that permission to, and give others permission to ask questions, to have these conversations, to talk, to ask about an experience, to learn from someone else, we're going to stay mired, in this muck of trying to get diversity off the ground.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think that's one of the things we always talk about too, is that you can't be afraid to talk to each other, because if you don't talk to each other, you're going to perpetuate the assumptions and the discrimination in your head because you're not able to get it out there, But if you have those discussions, then it lets you grow and lets you connect and find a commonality.
Right.
I had a similar situation years ago. A girlfriend of mine who she had biracial children. Her husband was white, and I said, I was mad because Obama kept a black. He had just gotten elected, and I was like, why does he just identify himself as black? Isn't he biracial? And she just looked at me and she said, John, he identifies himself that way because when he goes to school and he's around other people, he feels like he's black because he's around his peers, people that he identifies with. Don't take that personally, for God's sakes. And it was like such an eye-opener for me, because I'm like, wait a minute, he's denying, and he wasn't. This is how he identifies himself, and that's living his truth, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a big eye-opener for me, because I've always been such a fan of him and Michelle. But at first I didn't understand why he identified himself as black. And I had to have a good conversation with one of my black girlfriends, like Susan and Tameiko. My God, they've enlightened me about so many of these things, because I can have a real honest conversation with them and they'll say, that's racist, and here's why. So people, let's start talking. We can't keep walking on eggshells here.
And plus, the reality is, John, is if no one knew who Barack Obama was, if you saw him walking down the street, someone would still clutch their pearls in their handbag because he's a black man.
Yes,
absolutely. There's a saying I always say: if you think you're woke, you ain't woke. And somebody corrected me and said, if you think you're woke, you aren't woke. I'm like, okay, that's how you want to say it. Like, it's racist if you say it the other way. And I'm like, no, I don't think it's racist unless you think it's racist.
Right. Well, bottom line is prioritizing diversity will transform your teams.
Absolutely. Tech companies have received the backlash for not hiring and retaining Black people within the organization, especially Black women. Tameiko, what can companies do to fix this and make Black women feel like they belong, especially in regards to retention?
Yeah, so I'll start out with sort of a recruiting, like an entry question, right, or answer, because if you hire us at the right pay and level and scope, then we're off to a good start. So often we get down leveled, and then your scope is reduced, and that's where you enter a company. And so when that happens, the likelihood of making up for it and staying for a long period of time is reduced. Let's put it that way. So I'll start there, right? Because that's the entry. The other thing I'd say is, like, again, don't recruit people into an environment that's not going to support them. So you might want the numbers, but if you have managers who are repeat offenders with people who are diverse, don't bring any Black women into this organization. Like, that's the last place we need to be, right? So let's get your house in order first, get people prepared to be able to deal with a diverse workforce, including Black women, and then hire. Do that first and then hire. Don't hire and then wonder why you can't retain because some Black woman shows up to work with Afro hair and now you're offended and talking about, that's not very professional, right? Mm-hmm. So you think those sorts of microaggressions, who over time is going to stay in that sort of environment? And this is my natural hair. Right. So I think part of it is also you need to see us for what we are, assume positive intent. Oftentimes we don't have people who are not diverse, oftentimes don't have enough Black women or Black people in their circles to understand some of the things that we might be dealing with. Every one of these Black deaths that hits the news with police, even Black on Black, because I know that the next person will be like, what about Black on Black? Yes, that happens too. But all of this affects us. And you don't it's not, being Black isn't like wearing a coat. You don't come to work, hang off your coat, it's over there, I'm good. And then when I go home, I put it back on. When Ahmed Aubrey was hunted down in the streets, when we had Philandro Castile and Altern Sterling, killed within days of each other, I thought it was the same one, right? It's like, oh my gosh, it's a different name, same type of situation. Then you come to work, nobody's talking about this. Luckily, Google was talking about it at the time, which is where I was. But we need support. There are things that are happening in our communities that aren't happening in other communities. And it's not necessarily things that we're doing and bringing on to ourselves. We might have just been in the wrong place, wrong time, got pulled over by the wrong cop. There are plenty of good cops. Not all are good cops. And so we carry things that society puts on us. So, your job as my manager and in the environment that I work in is to support me so that I don't get to a place where I'm not well, I can't come to work, right? We should be supporting everybody. But I think what's missing is seeing how you can support each person on your team, those who are diverse and those who are not diverse.
No, absolutely. So it's about building a strategy where you're fixing your house and then putting policies in that actually make it welcoming.
Yep.
Susan, what do you think the most important steps leaders can take to create cultures where inclusion is truly the norm?
Recognize and be vulnerable and transparent with what their own biases are, and be willing to share their stories and and invest. It's not just time, it's also going to take money, and there's a lot of actions behind what they need to do. But when they start to amplify their voice, it can provide a more safe space for other people to do it. When you hear your leader not just read from a teleprompter and they are talking about and sharing their own personal stories, it can help change someone else's, to humanize themselves and to admit what they know and what they don't know. And that, that they're afraid that they might say the wrong thing, and that they're learning in this journey and what it is that's important to them, and have it be continuously a part of the conversation. With the leaders I've worked with, I've asked those conversations to start at the beginning of their meetings.
I love
Make it a priority, and not just you sharing your story, but other people sharing theirs. Because what Tameiko was saying is, you can't just invite people over, candidates included, and the front area of the house is clean, everywhere where they're going to be. And then you have them move in, and they go upstairs and there's hoarders living up there, and it's a hot mess. And that. So before you start to bring in that underrepresented talent, you have got to clean up your own house first. If you're not treating each other with respect and dignity, and you can't deal with conflict, how are you going to deal with conflict when you're uncomfortable because the person that you're having conflict with is seen through your biases, and you don't know how to deal with it because they don't look, live, and love like you? It just escalates. So there's so much we have to learn about each other, because you know what? These rich guys might be trying to get up in space, but they're not going to bring back employees. So we will be working with each other. And we need to figure out what that's going to be like, because everyone has to work. And it's critical. And you will cut back on the cost of having sick employees and having turnover if you start to address what is going on once people enter behind those doors.
That's right.
Do not tell people to bring their whole self to work, but leave the following outside before you come in.
Amazing. I love that. That's a great way to close this. I want to thank you guys all for today's session. I'm going to leave you with one last question. So we talk about microprogressions of consciously unbiased, and that's small action steps we can do to make the culture better within an organization. So what's one small action step that you think a leader can take to build belonging at work? And I do love Susan's basically strength and vulnerability. So if you show as a leader that things mean something to you, it follows everybody else. But whoever wants to start, go ahead.
I can start.
I'll start. I'll say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means you should be listening twice as much.
Love that.
I'll say retrain your mind. Like, this is not going to be, it's not necessarily going to be an easy transition. History is passed along from generation to generation. You may have some things you have to work out, but actually do the work. Retrain your mind, retrain your brain, reduce your biases, go off and get educated, step into the shoes of somebody else and understand that some of the things that they might be going through puts you in a more empathetic situation.
I love it. Another great one.
Be patient and lead with humility.
Very important.
I say listen, and also understand where someone else is coming from and be willing to have the conversation. Do not shy away from the conversation. I hear so many people in the workplace say, well, I'm just aggressive and I say what's on my mind and I'm very direct. And I always tell people, as a Black man, I don't have that luxury. I was taught to be thoughtful about what you say, because I could either end up arrested, in jail, dead. And so I encourage everyone else to be thoughtful, be mindful, understand that we're all different, and also understand that we all have similarities. I grew up in a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence. Like a lot of my colleagues, I did not grow up in the ghetto. That's an assumption that people make when I tell them I'm from Chicago until we have the conversation. So I encourage people to have the conversations. Don't shy away. If in terms of microaggressions, call it out, not in a mean or hostile way, but have the conversation.
I love it. Thank you, everybody. This is an honor. You guys gave us so much great information, and it's from the heart. Love it. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ash.
for having us.
Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you, Tameiko, Susan, and William. You guys did great. Mwah!
Thanks, all. Very good to see you.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.
William, give my best to Carmen.
Goodbye.
Same.